It wasn't even 2 months ago that a guy was busted in the immediate proximity of a Supreme Court justice's home, armed with a variety of weapons, admittedly near the conclusion of a cross-country effort to assassinate that justice for political purposes. In an otherwise insurrection-focused news cycle, that one has all but disappeared, at least as a major story. But the investigation into that would-be assassin, Nicholas Roski, continues. Of course, we know that when he was arrested, he had in his possession a Glock, ammunition, pepper spray, zip ties, a crowbar, duct tape, and even sneaky ninja boots designed to be as quiet as possible. Now, I'm no expert on what the capabilities of these assault boots are, but according to new court documents, that sort of assassin stealth was a high priority for this guy. Prosecutors now say that in the month prior to the attempted attack, Roski was searching online for the quietest rifles, the most effective place to stab someone, how to be stealthy. And he was asking a Marine Corps Reddit forum for tactics on taking out a high-value target, among other searches and postings of similar themes. And of course, all of this was done with political ends in mind, obviously against Kavanaugh, but we now know against other justices too. According to Roski's Discord conversation, this effort was planned not just to affect one justice or one case, but to, quote, change the votes for decades to come. To that end, Roski didn't just want Kavanaugh, outside whose home he was busted. Roski said, quote, I am shooting for 3. The other 2 in that trio are unnamed, but based on this guy's stated motive of Roe v. Wade and gun rights revenge, it's fair to speculate that Kagan, Sotomayor, Breyer, and Brown-Jackson were safe in this arrangement. And while U.S. Marshals were on site at Kavanaugh's house because of the ongoing threat, what ended this plot was not police intervention. What ended this plot was Roski calling 911 on himself after an apparent conversation with his sister. And of course, it's impossible to say definitively what would have happened otherwise. Roski's sister has become an afterthought, and what itself has become an afterthought story overall. But without the intervention of Roski's sister, this story likely plays out a lot differently. If this attack developed as originally planned, the court's decision never happens, and Roe is upheld. It's fair to say, at least to me, that Roski's sister didn't just do the right thing for her brother and for Kavanaugh personally. She did the right thing for her country and quite possibly changed its history for it. But we can go one step further even. Sure, what if the sister never intervenes is an interesting question, but how about what if there's never anything for her to get involved with in the first place? What if there's no reason for this guy to be at Kavanaugh's house at all? The afterthought cause to the afterthought story remains one of the greater political scandals in recent years. Recall, this attempted assassin cited specifically to police as a primary reason for devising and attempting this plot the fact that he was upset about the leaked draft opinion from May 2nd, the leak that turned out to be authentic and remained largely unchanged as the court's final opinion in the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe v. Wade on June 24th. The leak is why this threat materialized. Perhaps that was the leak's intentions, but the implications of the leak go well beyond simply justice safety. It's also about the safety of justice, as in, without trust within the institution, how will justice be served? How can the justices speak honestly with each other and analyze and decide cases fairly according to the law, not according to public pressure, if they know that if they think the wrong thing or say the wrong thing, that a colleague will betray them and a sneaky boots killer will be at their house later that night? They can't. And so instead, fear and politics will guide the court's decisions, not the rule of law, and justice will be a casualty, if not the justices themselves. That is why the Chief Justice called it an egregious breach of trust and pledged an investigation by the court's marshal to find the source of the leak. And if you check your watch, that was nearly 2 months ago. And if you haven't heard anything since, that's because there really hasn't been anything to hear since. Major media have gone all but silent on the story. The Washington Post has published nothing since mid-May. Same goes for the New York Times. There's almost no new reporting on the story except for one piece from the AP last Saturday in which the AP asked the court for new information. But all that shows is that the court has gone silent too. An AP reporter asked the Supreme Court spokeswoman for any updates, and not only would the court not say anything specific, as in whether a leaker has been identified or disciplined, whether any outside law firms or law enforcement like the FBI are assisting the investigation, whether the court has made any policy changes to prevent this from happening again. Forget the specific. The court won't say anything as broad as possible. The court won't even confirm whether the investigation is even still happening at all. And further complicating the matter, the person responsible, or people who may know who's responsible, may have already left the building. The court adjourned for summer on June 30th, meaning that, according to the AP, roughly 36 law clerks have now left the court to move on to other jobs. That's about half the 70 or so people who had access to the draft opinion at the time of the leak. And of course, investigators would still know who these staffers are, but depending on summer vacation plans, finding them and getting information from them may have become significantly more difficult. So we have no new information, at least officially, and the avenues to that information are getting longer, or so it would appear. Of course, it's understandably possible that the court's marshal is in fact hot on the trail and is just being tight-lipped in response to a loose-lipped problem. That would make sense, but if stopping leaky information is the priority, it isn't necessarily having that effect, because outside of the official no new information, the only new information we have comes from leaky, anonymous inside sources. At least so says CNN in a report published Tuesday, a story, if not about the motive of the leak, a story about its effect. Reporter Joan Biskupik says she has multiple unnamed sources inside the court dishing details. And yeah, unnamed sources tell CNN has all the credibility of a game of telephone on a kindergarten playground. So I wouldn't take these claims as unquestionably true, but in a story that lacks almost any information, all information ought to be considered. These sources within the court tell CNN that Chief Justice John Roberts was lobbying to maintain Roe v. Wade, quote, until the bitter end, and that Roberts was primarily targeting Kavanaugh for persuasion. These sources say that lobbying continued even beyond the May 2nd leak, which of course exposed Kavanaugh as a vote to overturn Roe, which was correct information. That was Kavanaugh's position dating back to December. But according to these sources, the leak made any persuasion that Roberts could pull nearly impossible, because of course it put Kavanaugh on record publicly, and any switch at that point would be seen as Kavanaugh caving. So what does that have to do with the leak? Well, according to CNN, Roberts' lobbying raised fears among the conservative wing of the court that their majority would fall apart. And since the leak had the effect of ending that threat, according to the sources, it is the implied speculation of this piece that the leaker comes from the conservative wing. Though that theory is not without its problems, the same sources tell CNN that Kavanaugh was never truly available to persuasion, just that he was willing to listen to Roberts, but never seriously contemplating a switch. It seems likely that the other votes to overturn Roe would be aware of that and wouldn't overreact with institutional destruction, though of course what the justices know and do and what their staffers know and do are two different things. This story is ostensible support for the conservative leaker theory, but I think it's just as sensible to see this story fit with the progressive leaker theory as well. If everyone inside the court has a decent knowledge of what's going on, they're aware of both the fact that Roberts is lobbying Kavanaugh and that Kavanaugh is really more just willing to listen, he's not actually available to persuasion, then the decision is already locked. And if the decision is locked and everyone knows that, well, then there's reason to blow it all up. If CNN is emphasizing the effect that this leak had on locking in votes that the same reporting says were already locked in, well, then we can't just ignore the effect this leak also had on inspiring an attempted assassination. If negotiations are done, then the only way to change the outcome is by making sure those votes never formally happen. The attempt to do that was also an effect of this leak, and that would point to a pro-Roe progressive leaker. Or, of course, perhaps the sources feeding CNN are completely full of crap. As noted by Ala Pundit over at Hot Air, it could be as simple as just pro-Roberts people trying to make Roberts look as good as possible. He was fighting for a compromise on precedent, but he was foiled by a rascally leaker. Or maybe this information is coming from the leaker himself or people close to the leaker to protect himself, because it is notable that the AP checked with the court late last week and the court said there's no new information. And then just a few days later, wow, suddenly lots of new information presented anonymously and exclusively to CNN. Maybe these people on the inside have an interest in the outside narrative going a certain way. And of course, it would be on brand for the leaker to achieve that effect by leaking. And just in case you had any doubt that this particular CNN reporter prefers that conservative meddling narrative, she repeatedly refers to the court majority as far right or hard right throughout her reporting on this story.
5 of the justices on the far right, the hard right justices stick with the far right.
Right. Fidelity to the Constitution and respecting the rights of the states and their citizens to make policy decisions for themselves. That's far right. But of course, completely betraying the Constitution with invented fiction to usurp and concentrate that power, that's never described as far left. Instead, that's just innocuously described as established precedent. Whatever the case, this reporter's sources say that the investigation is not anywhere near a conclusion and may never find any definitive answers at all.
There's just a lot of skepticism inside that despite how aggressive the investigation has gone, that they are not close to finding out who it is.
Which, again, could be true, or it could be information fed with the intent of creating a certain perception. Oh, it was definitely those meddling conservatives. But there's no proof of it, and there won't be any proof of it. So just accept that and move on. And definitely don't be at all suspicious of me leaking information to remind you just how bad leaking is. In CNN's post of this segment on Twitter, I see a lot of replies saying things like, see, it was a conservative leaker, and that's why conservatives have completely lost interest in this story. What happened to all the enthusiastic calls for investigation? They're all still here. I don't know anyone who agrees with the Dobbs decision but has no interest in learning how the leak happened, myself included. Agreement with the decision does not imply approval of the leak, because the principles of the institution are far more important than any one decision, even as important as this one decision is. Ironically, what makes the Dobbs decision so important is its loyalty to those institutional principles, loyalty to the law, loyalty to what the Constitution says, and not to a preferred policy outcome. Likewise, the need to find this leaker is not based on whether we like the leaker or not, or what he leaked or not. It's based on the fact that both leaks we like and leaks we don't are of equal threat to the institution and the constitutional application of justice itself. Nobody is quiet about that. In fact, it sounds like we all now agree that institutional integrity and adherence to the rules is more important than getting your personally preferred policy outcome every single time. If we do all agree on that, if we all agree that trashing the rules just to get what you want is so bad, great. Now do Roe. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Parler. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.